I'm not going to tell you about Bacchus worshipping orgies or how Romans guzzled wine like it was the elixir of the gods, because that's the kind of pop history drivel that turns complex empires into Netflix specials, usually wrong, always mid. Instead, let's ditch the heroic grape-stomping myths and zoom in on the gritty underbelly. Alcohol as an economic weapon, a logistical nightmare, and a cultural gatekeeper in the Roman world. Picture this, it's 98 AD, and Publius Cornelius Tacitus, that snarky Roman historian, is scribbling his Germania, describing how those barbarian Germanic tribes ferment barley into something resembling wine. But it's beer, folks, a frothy, grainy brew that Romans viewed with the same disdain you'd give a dollar store knockoff. One bizarre detail. These tribes would trade their mead, honey-fermented sweetness, often spiked with herbs that could knock you out faster than a gladiator's net, for Roman amphorae of actual vino. Imagine a burly Subai warrior, reeking of forest and fermented honey, haggling with a slick Roman merchant over a shipment that's half booze, half diplomatic bribe. It's grotesque, it's funny, and it screams inefficiency. Mead spoils quicker than wine, yet these exchanges happened because honey was abundant in the foggy northern woods where grapes wouldn't dare grow. But here's the macro pivot. This isn't just some quirky cultural clash. It's a window into the structural guts of Roman trade networks that stretched like overextended supply chains from the Mediterranean core to the foggy fringes of Barbaricum. Wine wasn't merely a drink, it was the empire's liquid gold, part of the Mediterranean triad, alongside olive oil and grain, fueling an economy built on asymmetric trade. Economically, viticulture exploded under Roman rule. By the 1st century AD, provinces like Gaul were pumping out millions of liters annually, thanks to technological tweaks like better presses and amphorae that could survive sea voyages without turning to vinegar. But beyond wine, beer and mead were the unsung heroes, or villains, depending on your snob level, in plugging the gaps where geography laughed at Roman ambitions. Logistically, shipping wine was a nightmare worthy of a modern Amazon warehouse meltdown. Amphorae, those bulbous clay jars, weighed a ton when full, up to 50 kilos each, and Rome imported over 20 million kilograms of olive oil alone yearly, with wine volumes hitting 2 million hectoliters for the capital's thirsty masses. Now pivot to beer. Brewed locally from barley, it didn't travel well without spoiling, so Romans in the north adapted barbarian methods, setting up breweries in Germanic outposts. Institutions like the Annona system, state-controlled grain distribution, evolved to include these inferior brews for legions stationed along the Rhine, where wine shipments from Italy faced bandit raids, river floods, and the sheer hassle of overland cartage. Geography dictated everything. The sunny hills of Hispania and Gaul cranked out premium wines for export, while the damp British Isles and Germania leaned on beer, turning local resources into taxable booze. And mead, oh, that's the wild card. Fermented from honey gathered in wild forests, it represented institutional failures in centralized agriculture. Romans couldn't scale beekeeping like they did vineyards, so they relied on tribute from allied tribes. This created a feedback loop. Trade Roman wine for mead and furs, strengthening economic ties that masked underlying tensions. By the 2nd century, under Trajan, the empire's 5 million square kilometers demanded a web of roads, rivers, Rhine, Danube as booze highways, and sea routes that moved not just alcohol but ideas. Brewing techniques diffused northward, hybridizing drinks. But cynically, this Pax Romana vibe was gatekeeping at its finest. Romans sneered at beer as barbarian slop. Tacitus called it fermented grain liquor. Yet economically, it kept the frontier stable, preventing revolts by keeping soldiers buzzed on whatever was available. Now for the global context, because no empire exists in a vacuum, right? Compare Rome's alcohol empire to China's Han Dynasty contemporaries. While Romans obsessed over wine's trade dominance, the Han fermented rice into huangjiu, a beer-like brew that powered their Silk Road exchanges, blending with mead-like honey drinks from Central Asian nomads. Fast forward to the Mongol Empire's Pax Mongolica in the 13th century, Khans juggled 4 drinks: kumis, fermented mare's milk, rice, beer, mead, and grape wine, echoing Roman multiculturalism but with horse-powered logistics that made Roman ox carts look cringe. Or think Italian merchants in the late Middle Ages. Venice's spice and wine monopolies aped Roman networks, but with better ships, turning alcohol into proto-capitalist grindset. Modern parallels, Uberize it. Roman wine trade was like Western Union wiring cash across empires, but beer and mead were the local gig economy hacks, cheap, on-demand, and essential when the main app crashes. Today's global alcohol market, worth trillions, mirrors this. Craft beer booms in barbarian niches, hello, IPAs from foggy Seattle, while wine giants like France export prestige, just as Gaul did for Rome. But here's the hard truth. Institutions failed when logistics buckled. Late empire inflation spiked wine prices, pushing peasants to beer, eroding the cultural glue that held the center. Economically, alcohol trade wasn't heroic, it was grindy, exploitative. Slaves toiled in vineyards, merchants skimmed profits, and the state taxed it all via portoria tariffs, funneling wealth to Rome's elite. Yet this system birthed innovations. Barrel tech, borrowed from Celts, replaced fragile amphorae by the 3rd century, revolutionizing storage and hinting at beer's northern influence. Cynically, Romans civilized barbarians with wine, but got hooked on their brews, meta-irony, as trade networks inadvertently sowed seeds of decline. Fast forward, by the 4th century, as invasions loomed, beer and mead surged in popularity among legions, diluting wine's monopoly. Institutions crumbled under logistical strain, supply chains snapped like overtaxed aqueducts. Compared to Ottoman successors, they banned alcohol officially but traded mead-like bozer undercover, showing how geography reshapes booze empires. In the end, Rome's alcohol story isn't about great men toasting victories. It's structural economics dictating what you sip, institutions enforcing snobbery, logistics deciding survival. Beer and mead, those beyond wine outliers, exposed the empire's vibes, dominant yet dependent on the fringes. Next time you crack a craft beer, remember, it's not mid, it's meta-history in a bottle.